Happy 9/11 Day. It's one word. 9/11 Day. November 7th. The day that shall live in infamy. Salty Cracker called it out directly, and I've been saying it too for years. That was a PSYOP, a psychological warfare operation meant to get us into endless wars that make the military industrial complex endless money while simultaneously using the trauma of a national tragedy to soften people's will, make them easier to control, and at the same time pass draconian unconstitutional surveillance laws in the name of stopping terrorism because of an event. But that event was a psychological operation. If they wanted to pass a law that was going to prevent that kind of terrorism, they would pass a law abolishing the government. Just saying. "20 years ago, I walked into work. I worked at Venus News. It was an adult bookstore, the downtown porn shop in Burlington. And I was the janitor. I was a jizz mopper. And I walked in that morning. It was about 10 o'clock. And I was a few minutes late for work anyway. And I got in there, and the boss is looking just like, I'm like, what's going on? And she goes, have you had the radio on? I was like, no, I was rocking CDs on the way to work. She goes, we're under attack. And I'm listening. I'm like, what? The what? The what? She goes, you don't have to work today if you don't want to. I was like, And I tried to do some like trash cans or something, a couple of basic things so that the store wouldn't be a complete shithole overnight or whatever. And then I was like, okay, I'm going home. I actually went to a friend's house. He had a bigger TV and cable, so I turned on the news and was watching it. Well, then of course the thing is, at that time, the only, YouTube wasn't really a thing. Independent journalism video wasn't a thing. When you think about the Electoral College or, governing or, waging war or anything 150 or 200 years ago, you think about the amount of time it takes to send a letter via boat across the ocean, right? Things had to happen over longer time spans. With the information age, it becomes more difficult. The ability to deceive is initially it was much more difficult to deceive people because the internet allowed people to communicate, hey, they're lying. Well, then they find out that if they use the internet to propagate their false information, then people will just propagate the false information in the same way, and they often do. They just, you say this person's lying and you show them proof with this, even if this person's lying, people will just believe that. You can say, well, that person's lying too, and you confuse people. A lot of folks are oversimplified thinkers. They don't view the world in the nuanced and somewhat complex way that it really exists. They like to think of things in very simple terms. And some things are just not that simple. Of all the footage that purports to show actual proof of the event as claimed, airplanes striking and all that, in New York City, all the footage came from people who worked for news networks, who had private cameras, who happened to have them on them that day, supposedly. There is zero footage from that day, from those events, from that attack, especially in New York City. There are zero videos that came from anyone but someone who worked for the fake news media. A lot of in-depth analysis of the video of the events of that day. Questions can, of course, be raised. Engineers have described what an aluminum airframe jumbo jet would do. Samira. What an aluminum jumbo jet frame would do at sea level. Samira. What a jumbo jet airframe would do at sea level at maximum speed, full throttle, is the wings would tear off and the fuselage would turn to confetti when it hit the building. See also my Afghanistan video. There were physicists who said that for an untrained pilot, and many experienced pilots said the same thing, for an untrained pilot flying impossible speeds at sea level to execute a perfect 200 and however many degree turn before bang, straight into a building. Some of the world's very, very greatest top pilots could not pull that off. Now, I suppose beginner's luck, but then there was the group of people of a particular ethno-religious demographic that were all advised in advance not to go to work that day. And a number of people of that same faith that were caught dancing across the river as the buildings fell. You really expect me to believe that a magical jet fuel fire that can melt steel beams, that can collapse a building from the top down in absolute defiance of physics. Google or YouTube or whatever, look up the pancake effect. You expect me to believe that pieces of paper from inside the airplane made their way undamaged to the ground and landed on top of the rubble pile to be found? You expect me to believe this? Buildings 1 and 2 were struck with planes. Building 6 suffered a massive crater damage near the bottom of building 1 or 2. I don't remember which one it was at. When people said it was like a bomb went off at the bottom in the basement or whatever, building 6 suffered concussive damage. Looked like a bomb went off. They never talk about that. Building 7 collapsed fully into its own footprint at 5-something in the evening that day. Supposedly from fire, although there's also footage of the guy who owned the building saying, well, they said they're going to pull it, so I said, okay, pull it. To pull it means to control demo. To control demo means to set things up weeks in advance. All sorts of questions about the footage. That supposedly is the proof, right? And all the people on the ground. And how could they possibly get so many people to play along? Well, there is such a thing as mass delusion and mass hallucination. In groupthink situations, people will hallucinate that they did in fact see what they were told that they should have seen because they want to go with the group. They do not want to be the outcast. Trauma and depression, things that most people felt after the attacks because like, Jesus, what? Right? Messes with your memory too. So, and I'm not even going to get into the really out there, and I'm not going to say that they're wrong. I don't believe that they're necessarily true. Some of them have some potential plausible merit, but, you know, I'm not personally at this time a proponent of the idea that directed energy was used or anything like that. I'm not experienced enough watching buildings be demolished to say, oh, well, that one's doing it different than all the other ones. I do know that several years after the Iraq War rollout, what was about 04 or 05, that a building of similar construction to 1, 2, and 7 in London burned and did not collapse because buildings like that have never collapsed when they burn. They're built that way on purpose. And those two giant twin towers were, in fact, built with a giant superstructure underneath and on the outside, made of steel, and a massive core in the center that was literally built to withstand greater impacts than what it took. If that impact was even real. We know that the previous owners of the towers sold it to the guy knowing that it had asbestos and that it was going to be impossible to remove asbestos from those buildings. Within a year, the building had been demolished by whatever happened that they're officially labeling an act of terror. And all of the 9/11 responders who were on the ground that day, who inhaled that dust, are dealing with mesothelioma and lung cancer, etc. A lot of things that those folks are dealing with. You can look into Jon Stewart of The Daily Show, his recent praise for Trump regarding 9/11 responders, and John's own work. John's a frickin' hero when it comes to that, because these people did not know what was happening. They had no clue about the fuckery that was to come, and they rushed headlong to their demise to save others. Some of them made it out, some of them didn't. The ones that didn't make it out are still dealing with the suffering of the consequences of all of the poisons that were in the air there. So big kudos to those people, even if the whole thing was a boondoggle, a lie. Shout out to those people, because they were like, lives are at stake, I'm going to do this thing, and they did. So, so there were actually 4 buildings that sustained damage from 2 airplanes. The 2 airplanes hit so high up that, nah. And the way those buildings collapse into their own footprint, and they have very deep sub-basements as well. That's where they found the molten steel, the molten iron pool down there, which is a sign of thermite, which is a sign of controlled demolition. Oh yeah, and then there's pictures of like the girder with the even cut off, and that was ground level. That was not something that fell. Soon after, war were declared. It's a Futurama joke. Oh, you mean, what does this mean? We'd be compelled to military duty? Well, that would only be if war were declared. And then all of a sudden an alarm goes off, and you're like, what's that? And he goes, war were declared. We went to Afghanistan to look for a guy who had been hiding out in Pakistan. I've been over that in the Afghanistan video. I'm not going to rehash it here. In 2003, they made a big hoopla about weapons of mass destruction. By that time, I was quite skeptical of the official narrative, because a number of things had changed from what had happened on the beginning of the actual day. And a few documentaries had come out exploring questions. By 2003, I was commuting from Burlington to Iowa City to work at a call center for MCI, the telephone company, selling long distance. They'd just come out of their bankruptcy or whatever they'd done. They were expanding. They paid good. The product did not sell. Nobody wanted MCI. I made one sale. It was the very last call that I made, and I was actually terminated because of a joke that I made on that call, even though the customer laughed and bought the product. But it took me 6 weeks of nonstop calling daily to get a sale on that junk program. Meanwhile, during this time, they had a really nice internet cafe, free long distance phones and TVs and everything in their break room there, because of course it's a telecom company. They're going to give you free everything of that. And if I'd worked there long enough, I could have got free long distance on domesticate. Or I think for the 6 weeks I was there, my parents had free long distance. I did the Blockbuster deal because my parents like to rent movies, and I basically called them from a work phone and made that sale initially. And I couldn't get anybody else to buy it, but I sold my folks on it. It was actually a decent rate for the long distance and for the amount of calling that they did from the home phone. This is right before cell phones. They got about 10 free movie rentals a month. So the value was there for the right deal. So anyways, I'm in the break room at this telecom place, MCI, and I'm actually having a chit chat with a Desert Storm vet. And she was talking about, how they're going to war, and she's like, I'm not really sure about this weapons of mass destruction thing, though. And I was like, you think? I was like, they seem really confident, but I mean, what does this have to do with 9/11? She goes, I don't think this has anything to do with 9/11. So then, in the break room at MCI in 2003, I watched that stupid, terrible, propagandistic night vision ride along of tanks just blasting across the desert, gonna take Baghdad. Hoorah, let's roll. And immediately I was like, awake. Since then, I've been attempting to hone my ability to detect deception, to understand truth, to be able to see through to the truth of things, finding ways to help show others, because it's really not easy to convince people. It really is not easy to convince people. I've studied a lot of it's one of those I've learned more and forgotten more than I can remember that I know. But it pops up and it comes in because I do still know it. It is still there. I just have to search for it. The lengths people will go to intellectually to avoid unpleasant truths is something to behold. And I'm guilty of this as well, because my mind still tries to rationalize 19 guys with box cutters, dancing Israelis, impossible aeronautics, with the possibility that even though it looks like it's CGI, it feels like it was flown by remote control. But maybe that's because it's CGI. And, which, by the way, check out a movie called Wag the Dog with Dustin Hoffman about CGI effects used to fake the existence of a war that was not real. Very interesting movie. My brain tries to reconcile these other parts that have been propagandized in. The seeds are planted regardless, and I can keep chopping the sprouts of those thoughts, but the seeds are still there. It's a problem. But it's even worse with people that have no interest in knowing what is really true. They just want to live their comfy little lives in blissful ignorance, not know about anything, have the things that they have, and accept that this is what reality is, life is, has, and always will be this way. It's how they want it to be. Those of us who've been around long enough or seen any kind of events that show us how you shouldn't take things for granted will automatically know that you shouldn't take any of that for granted. In past years, when I was on social media, I would every year on this day post a big old thing. And I have a lot of people that I was friends with that also skeptics of the event, have their own meme fests and everything, and I might share a few here and there and all that. And this year, I don't have social media. I'm not doing it. Last year, I didn't really do it either. I had other things on my mind. But, because of the Afghan situation this year, it's the 20th anniversary, a full 2 decades since the false flag psychological warfare operation led to 2 illegal wars, which eventually became 7 or more that we don't know about. There were other countries that they were in that we also did not know about. led to the USA Patriot Act. This is important because very likely there's going to be another law like that on the books, either due to the pandemic or due to the January 6th incident. Even though even the FBI themselves, having investigated, have said this does not rise to the definition of an insurrection. It barely rises to a riot, because they say when 4 or more people are illegally gathered, typically that's what you can consider a riot. When there's violence involved, and when some people are violent but other people aren't, they label the whole thing a riot. Old lady walking through, staying in the velvet ropes like most of them, taking pictures like, ooh, wow. And they've arrested like 100 people, but nobody's being charged for sedition, treason, or insurrection. They're being charged with vandalism and trespassing. That means they got nothing on them. That day 20 years ago led to everything that is currently wrong. But it was not the initiation of the process. It was the catalyst to solidify, to permanentize the process. This has been going for a very long time. Don't forget that old Rockefeller dude always took pictures back in the 40s and 50s or before with the clock saying 9/11. And always had little pictures of things. This was a plan. This was a thing that was going to happen for a long time. And when the time was right, it was going to happen. Not the specifics of the event, but specifically that the event was a traumatic catalyst to enable brainwashing and control, to make it more easy, and to justify the military-industrial complex trying to endlessly gouge countries with war. There really isn't much more to be said than that. Wars for resources, wars for political control, or both. Iraq has oil and is on one side of Iran. Afghanistan has opium and is on the other side of Iran. Syria has gas pipelines running from Russia to Europe through it. That is to the north of Iran. And to the south of Iran is the Persian Gulf. Resources, political control, world domination, enabled, catalyzed, and spurred by a false flag, psychological warfare operation against the American people to manufacture consent. Happy 9/11 Day, everyone. But really, although they infringe and encroach on our freedoms are natural rights that exist regardless. Yes, they may even deprive us of our right to life by killing us. It does not make us any less free. If we allow the infringement, if we allow that, it makes us less free. But we can always take the power back. We have to shrug them off. We have to, as hundreds of millions, as billions of people on the whole planet, tell the crooks that walk around in their suits with their armed guards and their fancy buildings and their pieces of paper with their pretty writing on it, about how this pretty writing says that I get to tell you what to do. I could just tell them to fuck off. If everybody did that, we can find other ways to do it that don't involve the same systems, or we can cleanse the systems of crookedness, add a couple of nuanced caveats to the law to prevent future corruption, and try and, in the meantime, come up with a mechanism to detect the corruption sooner, so that people who cheat to get into office to then do atrocious things that ruin it for everyone in the entire country and other parts of the world as well are not allowed to stay in place. because they say, well, I don't know what you're talking about. Well, I don't know anything about that. It was legit, trust me. And we just do. If everybody tells those people to fuck straight off, we can move forward, we can be free. Freer than we are right now. But your freedom is still there. Your natural rights are still there. No matter what. If you're by yourself, like me out in the country, I have and exercise every single right. So that's the trick, is live someplace where they don't do that to you. And if they show up at where you live to try and do that to you, it's that Danny DeVito meme. So anyways, then I started blasting. Happy 9/11 day.